Hey y'all, so welcome back. Here we are already in week 4 of online learning and having class done remotely. Um, so thank y'all for your patience as we go through the semester and for everybody who's been submitting journals and your flash fiction pieces and contributing to the discussions. I've been enjoying reading that and seeing y'all's comments and everything. Um, so thank you for that. And this week I'm going to keep the video kind of short, or at least shorter than the previous two, and just talk real quick about the two pieces that you're going to read for this week. One of them is Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, and the other is A Worn Path by Eudora Welty. And both of those are on Moodle, and then you'll be writing a journal, a separate journal for each story. Um, we're moving in this week to our last sort of topic for craft, and the topic is setting and character. And so I chose these stories, which you'll see when you read them, because they're both very focused on character. And the Eudora Welty piece has a very strong setting that almost becomes a character in the story itself, which I like. And I like when fiction does that, where like the environment of the piece acts as sort of an antagonist or protagonist in some cases in the story. So you'll see that with the Eudora Welty piece, and I mentioned in the journal assignment, just think about how this story might connect to other pieces that you've read. I mean, you can do a Google search on it and find a lot of them, but I've seen it compared to Little Red Riding Hood before, which is interesting. And then, of course, the main character's name is Phoenix Jackson. And so look up the legend of the Phoenix, even on Wikipedia or something, just to, if you're not familiar with that myth, just to get an idea of the general story behind it, and then make some parallels or connections with Eudora Welty's story. So when you're writing your journal, just think about those things, and mainly though, think about how this setting is a character in the story, how it sort of acts against Phoenix and what she's trying to accomplish, and even in parts where she's actually kind of talking to the environment, the trees or the shrubs that she falls into. And then, for your last story, your last submission, I'm hoping that you'll sort of combine all these elements together to make a really strong piece. So we've talked about voice, we've talked about dialogue, now we're talking about character and setting. And so hopefully you're thinking about all those things sort of combined all the time, but, in particular when you're writing the last submission. I said this in the announcement, but I'll just repeat it. Next week is spring break, so just take it easy. I'm going to try not to send you any emails or anything like that. And then on the 19th, which is this Sunday after spring break, if you're in Group A, I posted the groups on the email. Submit your piece and just send it as an email, and then we'll comment. I already set it up in Moodle. It's not visible yet, but I'll make that visible next week or something, so we can comment, just like y'all did with the flash pieces. So that's the Eudora Welty piece, and how that hopefully relates to what you're writing or will write. And then the other piece is the Flannery O'Connor story, which a lot of people have probably read. A Good Man is Hard to Find, and so I wanted to use one that you may not have read before. So Good Country People. This story obviously is very character driven, and the characters are kind of odd. And so my question that I ask on the journal is, do you think, based on the way the characters are written and portrayed, if Flannery O'Connor um, for lack of a better way of saying this, if she dislikes people and she's sort of writing the negative aspects of humanity, um, for no other reason than just to point out how terrible people are to each other and how hopeless humanity is? Or is there a sense in the story that she's showing us these things, but there is ultimately hope, and there's a good reason for her doing it? And I use the word, is she a misanthrope? Which means, does she dislike humanity or humankind or people? I wouldn't consider this story satire, certainly, but people have sometimes criticized satirists as being misanthropic. The example I always think of is Jonathan Swift. Um, when he wrote A Modest Proposal, people said that he must hate people. But his argument was always like, well, no, I care about humanity so much that I want to show them these sort of ridiculous examples to hopefully help them improve. And I would argue that that's what Flannery O'Connor is doing with her work. A term that always gets thrown around when we talk about Flannery O'Connor is grotesque. Pointing out these sort of characteristics of people that are unusual or odd. So we have Hulga with the wooden leg. We have the Bible salesman. We have the tenant farmers who live on the property or near the property. They're strange characters. But why is she showing us those people? What is the point? Flannery O'Connor even said, if you want people in the back of a room to hear you, you have to shout. And likewise, if you want people to see a character, you draw large, startling figures. And I'm paraphrasing that, but it was something along those lines that she said. And so these characters are large, startling figures. But what is the point? What is the purpose of showing us these people? I mean, certainly it's kind of funny to read the story. I mean, it is darkly humorous. But there's more than just her wanting to get a laugh from her readers. So when you read this story and when you're writing about it and thinking about it, just kind of, have all this in the back of your mind, these things that I'm saying, and then also later on in a couple of weeks when you're writing your own story, maybe try to include some interesting characters. Certainly you've done that in the pieces I've read of yours already this semester, but think about how characters interact with each other and how they propel the plot of the story, and then also, like I said, how the setting of your story can be a character also. So just to comment real quick on the journals from last week, I was happy to read everyone's submissions on the Larry Brown articles. Hopefully you enjoyed reading those as much as I did. I have always liked him and the story of his career, I guess. And like I said, I think it's important to not just read fiction, but to also read stories about writers. I just wanted to point out two journals. Alex, I thought it was interesting, and I'm glad you noticed this, but you said, you pointed out how I mentioned or used the phrase teaching people about writing instead of saying teaching people how to write. And I'm glad you pointed it out, because that was a very conscious choice on my part to phrase it that way. Because I think, my job as a teacher is to inspire students, and that's why I tend to be so positive with my comments, my feedback. But I also don't like the idea of me being this figure with all this knowledge that I'm just like passing down to other people. I feel like, I have this knowledge, I have this experience, but I'm sort of sharing it, and we're having a discussion. And that's why I like the journals, and I like the threads that y'all are responding to, because it's a conversation. There's no one person who has all the answers. There's something, and I haven't had the opportunity to use this phrase, but I have a lot of writer teacher friends who always say, "Oh, I'm going to teach this story today in class," or "I'm going to teach this poem in class," and I steer away from that verb intentionally, because I always say, "Well, I'm going to talk about this story in class. I'm going to have a discussion about this poem in class," because I think I learn from y'all just as much as y'all learn from me. Um, and so I'm glad, Alex, that you noticed that I phrased that in that particular way. That was intentional on my part. Um, I feel like I'm just sort of moderating a discussion with many talented people, and I'm, every day just kind of honored and in awe that I get to do this for a living, because y'all are all super smart, super talented, and I mean, this is, even though this is not the ideal circumstance, I'm happy just to read your words and see your stories on, even if it has to be on Moodle. It's still good for me. And then I on Chris's journal, I thought it was interesting, and I agree completely. I think Chris was the only one who said this, is that these pieces were very sad. And I agree that there's something sort of tragic, not just because Larry Brown died young, but there's something sad about this sort of drive. We don't know where it comes from, but it can be, I mean, to the outsider, a lot of times it looks like, oh, wow, this person's very successful. They've done all these things. They published all these books. It must be so, so wonderful. But what we don't often see are the things that we see in these articles about Larry Brown, where his wife says something to the effect that it's not a picnic to be married to this guy. And if you watch the video that I mentioned, the documentary, The Rough South of Larry Brown, she says, I didn't marry Larry Brown, the writer. When I married Larry Brown, he was that may have been even before he was a firefighter. But she doesn't make a secret, or she doesn't make it a secret that it's difficult. The pressures that he feels, because of his fame, the traveling that he has to do, and also, the effects that has on him with his, I mean, we could read into this as him having sort of a problem with drinking. And one of y'all mentioned in your journals about him dancing on the table, and I'm trying to find who it was that said that. I don't quite see it, but anyway, one of y'all mentioned that. Maybe it was even on the YouTube video, I don't remember. But that's sort of a funny story, but it's also kind of sad and kind of tragic in a way. Again, I mean, you can read a lot more about Larry Brown. There's a biography that I mentioned last week. There's the documentary. To me, it's inspiring. Whether it's him or any other writer or artist, it's always inspiring to hear their story, how they got where they got. But like most of y'all said, I mean, these things can be taught, but there has to be that drive. There has to be that initial willingness to try new things with your writing and your work. I don't know. So all that's there, and I was just very glad to read y'all's pieces. If I'm not commenting on yours, it's not that I didn't read it or I didn't like it, but Chris and Alex, what y'all both said, I thought was just, it kind of stood out to me. Even though I read those a couple of days ago, I was still thinking about those things. So that's it for the Larry Brown stuff, and the two stories for this week. I'll post another announcement on Moodle soon. I'll try not to bombard y'all with emails. Keep submitting your flash fiction if you haven't submitted it yet. I'm trying to be somewhat lenient on all these dates. I can't be too lenient, because then it backs me up when I have to grade everything all at once or read everything. So try to get as close to the deadlines as you can, but obviously I'm not taking points off, and hopefully this works well for y'all, that I try every Monday to get it all posted and discussed, and then you have all the way until that following Sunday to do the work. The last thing I want to do is overwhelm people. So if you have questions, send me an email. Hopefully these videos are useful to you. I'm hopefully keeping this one a little bit shorter than the others. Again, I just don't want to overwhelm y'all. So have a good week. I won't post a video next week because it's spring break. So just be safe, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye.